Welcome everybody. Today I'm going to talk about the Sony Magic Bus 3.0 and the acoustical performance of it and the things that went into tuning it. I'm very appreciative to Sony for the creation. Hiro-san, the designer, is in the audience, and I'm very appreciative for his design brilliance. And this piece is an extraordinary sounding piece and really transformative to the sound of the bus. And I'll talk about some of the interior acoustical aspects and the integration of the Sony piece and some of the tuning challenges. Of course, here's a picture of the bus. It's an unlikely demonstration vehicle. It's rather large. I chose it for the acoustical properties. Its internal volume is the greatest of basically any street legal vehicle, and that internal volume lends itself to the possibility of having a reverberation time based on the theoretical calculations of up to 3 seconds. And that would be if every internal surface was non-absorptive and totally reflective. And that calculation alone, that fundamental understanding, helped me realize that the internal volume was important and essential to achieving an appropriate reverberation time for a music listening environment. Another aspect, and the other thing is when you think about an audio system, typically you think of electronic components as being principal to the performance of the audio system, but in fact, one of the most important, if not the most important component, is the room itself, because you can have the greatest components, and if the room gets in the way of the performance of the components, it is in fact a limitation. So the approach with the Magic Bus was original, because prior to the bus, most cars were in fact cars that were used for competition. And I saw an opportunity to capitalize upon the potential acoustics of a large vehicle. The high roof of the Magic Bus also allows for the control of early reflections, and it also allows for a large, expansive soundstage in the front. Typically, when I listen to standard automobiles, the low roof height and the narrower width results in a compressed impression of the musical soundstage, where I believe the bus is more expansive and immersive in its sound, and presents something that is more like what I'm accustomed to witnessing live. So in addition to the internal volume, it's also important to understand the shape of the room and how the resonance modes are distributed. So the first thing I did was measure the dimensions of the bus. So I have the height, the length, and the width, and then I did some volume calculations, and then I came up with the resonance modes. So highlighted, you can look down the table and you can find these resonances, but when you look at these modes, what you're really looking for is, do the modes bunch up? You want the resonance modes to be distributed so that you can control them in some way. Maybe isolate them, maybe absorb them, or the ultimate result is to try to control them or distribute them to minimize their effect. The bus had 3 resonance modes that sort of stacked up on one another, and I'll show you that in the next slide. This is a distribution of the resonance modes. So here is the frequency of the modes within the bus, and then here are the number of modes. And it's interesting when you get right here at 500 hertz, but you know, there's two modes that are essentially coincident. But if you look at it, if you count, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I don't know, by the time you get here, you're at the 25th mode. It just doesn't matter anymore. Principally, when you look at the modes associated with the room, you're looking in the, you know, in the bass region here. And here you can see the stack up of the 93, the 96, and the 102. Now the 102 corresponds to the width mode of the band, and you'll notice when you look at the inside of the bus, you'll see the walls have perforated panels, and those perforated panels are Helmholtz absorbers tuned exactly to 102 hertz. And they're narrow Q, there's no stuffing, they're completely hard inside. And the goal is to have the narrowest Q to absorb that resonance inside the bus. By the way, feel free to ask questions as we go along. It's, yes?
Did you measure all this, or is this all calculated?
Did I measure all this? Yeah. Or these are calculated modes based on the internal dimensions. And I'll show you some measurements with regard to reverberation as we go along. Here's a funny story. You have a balloon, and you have a dry lake bed, and you have a crazy guy like me who needs to be in this place. Now, why am I there? First of all, well, and then here's the key to the whole thing. This is a Brüel & Kjær 2270 handheld sound meter. It's a $10,000 device. It was loaned to me by Brüel & Kjær because they believed in what I was doing and were impressed by it, because it really was one of the first applications of the use of that device in the mobile environment. So knowing the theoretical resonances and the modes, I'm a scientist, so at first I do the theory, then I develop an approach to address the theory, then I measure experimentally, and then I validate, and I close the loop. So this process of acoustical interior design is based on that, which is only go by I'm an experimentalist, by the way. There are two types of scientists, principally. There are theoreticians and there are experimentalists. My day job, I work with composites and mechanical testing and thermal analysis and rheology. So everything that I do is an experiment, validating the performance. And sometimes as a scientist, you observe a performance and you can't explain why it happens. I've given up a long time ago on explaining why things happen. I trust the measurements. And there's two ways to measure audio performance, with microphones and with your ears. And your ears, of course, need to be educated just like your palate would be for tasting wines. And there's this famous quote about wines. So if you had this great wine and you analyzed it with HPLC and FTIR and mass spectroscopy and all of the great analytical techniques that are available to us, would these instruments really tell you how the wine tastes? And the answer is no. There's only one way to experience the wine, and that is to taste it yourself. Because there's something magical about the senses. And when I travel frequently and share the bus with people and talk about the amazing attributes of the sonic qualities, many people say to me, well, I don't have the experience or the know-how, or my ears aren't as finely tuned as yours are. And I stop them and I say, you trust your eyes when you look at a television and you buy high-resolution 4K TVs, and the market is very successful for that. Wines are very successful because people trust their taste buds. Everybody loves food. You know good food when you taste it. But why do you not trust your ears? Your ears are transducers of incredible capability. They cover decades and decades. When I work in industry and I use transducers of various types, strain gauges and load cells and well, most everything is derived from a strain gauge or a load cell, but so many transducers that I encounter, you get 3 decades, maybe 5 decades of performance. You've got an amazing transducer. Your ears go many, many decades, and it's amazing because you can sense the magnitude of a sound to 1/1,000,000th of its intensity, and you can hear it. That's minus 60 dB, and you can hear systems turned down. So your ears are absolutely amazing transducers, and with a little bit of training, just like your taste buds for wines and such, closing the loop and calibration, so to speak, you can become an experienced listener. But the bus is so obvious in its performance that you don't need to be an experienced listener to know that that's good sound, that sounds like what you've heard when you're out commonly listening to music and being in the natural environment. So anyway, back to the bus. So we've got this goal of making the room as good as it can be for the mobile environment. So I set this up, and I needed to figure out how to make an impulse response. So I've got 2 choices. I could fire a gun, but I didn't want to put a hole in the roof. And so I thought, well, why not balloons? Because balloon pops are pretty good. So I went to the Hallmark store, and I said, I'd like to buy 50 balloons, please. And she said, the gal at the counter, lovely, said, wow, you must be having a big party. And I said, no, I'm gonna go pop them all. And she looked at me like I was crazy, and of course, those who know me know that I am. And I said, I'm gonna pop them all. So I took all my balloons to the desert. Well, why did I go to the desert? I was in my driveway, and the Brüller sound meter, what you do is you create your impulse signal. Then this thing measures the decay of the signal for 4 seconds and acquires 800 data points over 4 seconds. And to get the decay times, the RT60, I mean, theoretically you would want to let the sound decay to 1/1,000,000th of its intensity, but the problem is background noise. Background noise in the city is like 40 and 50 dB. It's way too much. So if my signal is 80 dB and I've got 50 dB of background noise, I can only acquire 30 dB of decay. Not quite enough. So, you know, acousticians do tricks like they do the T20 time, which is the time for 20, let's see, yeah, negative 20 dB of decay, and then they extrapolate to minus 60. Because really, finding a place where you can get to minus 60 with low background noise is very hard. So I'm like, well, I live 2 hours away from the desert, so I told my wife, where's my wife? Is she down here? Anyway, I told my wife, I said, baby, I'm going to the desert. What for? I'm going to pop a bunch of balloons and take measurements. She's like, have a good time. And so I went to the desert, popped a bunch of balloons, collected the data, went back to San Diego, and did the calculate. Yes, sir?
What was the background noise in the desert?
Oh, perfect. I was going to say that, and I forgot. 17 decibels in a dry lake bed in the middle of nowhere. This was Anza Borrego, by the way, one of my favorite places to escape. This was at near Peg Leg in Anza Borrego. It's at least 2 or 3 miles from anything civilized, and it's really quiet out there. In fact, when I did the measurement, by the way, it was 103 degrees out there. So the sweat was dripping, and it was so quiet, the sweat drop from my forehead would hit the bare steel floor at that time, and you could hear it. It would go tink. So I knew I was in the right place. So I was really quiet. So what I did is I took a utility knife and a long pole, and I was back behind the passenger bench seat, and I would take this spear and I would pop the balloon so that I was not interfering with the acoustical field near the microphone to capture the decay. So anyway, I went back to San Diego and I thought, okay, I did all my calculations and I calculated the surface area of all the Helmholtz absorbers required and went through the frequencies that I needed. And okay, it's time to go back to the desert again to validate what I had predicted would solve the problem. So I go back to the Hallmark store and I buy 50 more balloons. And she's like, oh, not you again. So I take 50 balloons and go out to the desert again and pop them all again. And I find out that the number of treatments that I made was insufficient. So now I had to design more treatments, and those are the treatments that are in the back rear, driver's side rear corner of the van. There's a pancake stack of Helmholtz absorbers. I think there's 18 of them, and they're tuned to 40 hertz, and then the ones in front of it are tuned to 102. And so went back to the Hallmark store, bought 50 more balloons, and took the new pancake stack of, so 3 trips to the desert, tons of data analysis, and 2.5 years of fabrication to arrive at this. So what is this? So this is the T20 that I talked about. This is the time for the time for the reverberation SPL to decay to minus 20 dB. On the x-axis is the frequency, and then these gray lines are the International Telecommunications, the ITU, International Telecommunications Union standards for studios. So this is what you're shooting for. So this is the lower bound right here. And what this says, see this line goes down? It basically says you can never have your bass too dry in order to keep your bass under control. And what the upper line suggests is that they say, hey, you can let your bass rise a little bit and it won't hurt you. There's this narrow band between 200 hertz and, let's see, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, where you need to be within this time. And I think, let's see, that's not a log scale, so that's 1, 2, 3. So this is 0.2 milliseconds, this is 0.3 milliseconds. So the next thing, so I have a standard for studios. So I was curious, what are normal cars like? So here are normal cars. Look at it, it goes way, so here's the general shape of a normal car. And what are the normal cars? The yellow is a BMW X5. The red is my wife's Beetle. So again, she thought I was crazy popping balloons in her Beetle. And a Jaguar. So a broad selection of cars with a wide variety of internal volumes. And you can see that all the cars are, you know, at or below 0.1 seconds, and then they rise dramatically up to here, 0.6 seconds in the bass at, let's see, 20, 30, 40, 50, I lost count, 50 or 60 hertz. And the goal of the reverberation spectra is to have it as flat as possible, even. so that all frequencies decay at the same time. Well, then there's another benchmark out there. The blue dots. What's RH? That's Robert Harley's listening room, custom built by Norm Varney in his home in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Now, Norm Varney is an amazing acoustician and quite famous, and I read everything that he writes because he's an expert, just like Anthony Gramani, right? Those two are really amazing, and there are plenty of others, Ethan Weiner, and so on. I try to learn and absorb and apply everything from those who came before to integrate and amalgamate and push the state of the art. So I read a lot. And in fact, you know, to build the bus, I read hundreds and hundreds of pages of research papers over crossover design and frequency response, everything from Harman, everything from all the AES journals and things to achieve success. So this is Robert Harley's room, and you can see it's doing pretty good. Little thing here. There are some folks who think that home listening rooms should be a little bit more reverberant, and his bass is pretty well under control too. The black is the Magic Bus. And you can see that the acoustical treatments are quite effective. And this is what lends a quality to the bus that no other car can have. And this is profound. This is something that I read hundreds of papers and worked 2.5 years. Maybe there's 10 or 20, there's probably 20 sheets of plywood in the van. It's all Jobert, French marine grade plywood. Hard to get, by the way, and expensive. And so this is the Reverberation Spectra, and it's really quite flat across the band, and within the mid-range, the critical mid-range, it pretty much complies with the ITU standards. So when I say studio quality acoustics, it's not just talk, it's validated by measurement. And to my knowledge, there's no other competitor and no other car that I know of that has this validated measurement. So now we have the room taken care of. We've got the new incredible Sony GS9, and we combine that with the Helix DSP Pro processor, which I explained yesterday in my presentation. It has all of these incredible features. It's basically permits unlimited programming, so I won't elaborate on that anymore. I'll just go right to the use of the Helix DSP. Sorry about the darkness, but basically this is the matrixing or the channel routing. So on the Sony head unit, it's really nice because it has front left, front right, it has rear right and rear left, but it also has a subwoofer output. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to dedicate an interconnect to the subwoofer alone to retain the controls that are available at the head unit of the GS9? So I did. And I used Kimber cable silver interconnects with silver RCAs. And then this is the channel routing architecture. I've got the full range left signal going to the front left channel and the full range right signal going to the front right channel. And then there's a subwoofer which I'm using routing from the Helix to the output. So I have 7 outputs on the Helix piece. Then I had to get to work with EQing and time alignment. So here's a picture of the main screen of the Helix DSP. Now look at what's going on here. I mean, this graph pretty much tells it all. This is the mid-range driver, the EQing. Look what happened there. Now the goal with EQing is not to just mess with these bars, you know, these adjustment bars here and try to make this flat. That would seem obvious, but that's not the right thing to do. Wherever there's a null, it's probably wise to understand why that null exists, and it's probably of acoustical origin, and it's probably uncorrectable, and it would be probably unwise to boost in that region. So that was my philosophy, to principally apply only cuts as required, and boost only very, very judiciously. And in fact, any boost, look at, there's 0, by the way. Oh, look, there's a little boost. Nothing is boosted. It's mostly cuts. In fact, it's almost exclusively cuts, judiciously applied where to mitigate the effects of comb filtering. Look at here, this driver, this is the left, yeah, this is the left side. So this is the left door woofer. And look, there's a peak in the response. You know, so I think that's at 111 hertz or something, I forget exactly, but this is what was necessary to correct the response. Now, this is what is electrically programmed into the DSP. Now, of course, what I was using as feedback to achieve this was the acoustical response at the listening position. That was my feedback for input to these adjustments. So we have the mid-range right here, and look at the incredible dip that was required at 2.5K, and then another one at 3.2. Here's the tweeter right here, big dip required at 5 or 6K. So this is fascinating. And these bands are of unlimited, you'll notice the oddball numbers. Look at 158, 99, 79, and then some adjustments here, 2.6K, I had to make some corrections. So this infinite programmability is an amazing feature of this device and essential to good acoustical performance. So here's the right channel. That's it's harder to see, sorry about that, but here's the right door woofer, and you can see going back, look how that compares to the left door woofer. So there's the EQing of the left door woofer. Here's the EQing of the right door woofer, and you would ask yourself, how can that work? They're so dissimilar in electrical programming. Wait till you see the acoustical result. It's hard to make out the mid-range, but it goes along right here. And then the tweeter, gosh, I can barely see it. It's right here in blue. Sorry about that, but you get the idea. Here's the left channel response. Now, it would be tempting to, this is magnitude in SPL, this is the frequency. It'd be tempting to smooth it, to make it look better for you, you know, to sort of hide something. But I elected to use 1/6 octave to reveal the truth. And you can see, here's the acoustical response of the door woofer. So remember all that EQing? Look at how it turned out. It's quite nice. Look at the mid-range. Flat. And you know, each division, that's a dB. So I'm plus or minus a dB from 200 hertz up to 1K. Now, here's a problem right here. This is intrinsic to the acoustical response in the van, probably due to an early reflection off the side glass. No escaping that. All cars suffer from that, so no apology. Look at the amazing response of the tweeter. Look at the slope is perfect 24 dB per octave. By the way, I made a spreadsheet in Excel, and I fit this data in Excel and calculated the slope and guaranteed that each of these slopes is plus or minus a half a dB per octave at 24 dB per octave. So these slopes are all 24 on average. Obviously there's a little anomaly here. Here's again another consequence of the difficulty of an automobile environment. Of course, I would like this to go straight down like that, but that dip simply prevented it. And again, it's a consequence of the automotive environment. So this is very good response. I mean, it's plus or minus neglecting this dip. Now, here's the crossover point. This is what, 2.3K or so. And you can see I've got a dip in the response. Well, that was due to the dip in the mid-range. It's tempting to try to boost that, but it would be terrible to do so because it's probably uncorrectable. All cars suffer from these sorts of problems. I do tuning as on the side, and I encounter all sorts of cars, and every car has significant acoustical challenges and anomalies. But this is quite, if you compare this to $100,000 speakers, this is a very good measurement. This is quite an achievement. Here's the right channel. And things don't look as good, do they? Here's a dip in the mid-range. Look, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 dB, about 5 dB. Nothing I could do about it. Just intrinsic to the right. You know, there's this belief in car audio that competitors had where you want to get farther away from the speakers to equalize the path links. Well, guess what happens? The farther away you get, the worse the room affects the sound. You may be gaining one thing, but you're certainly giving up something else. And my experience has shown that being closer to the speakers is better for sound because it gives less opportunity for the room to influence the sound. And of course, here's another anomalous dip. And if you did the math, this is probably some multiple if you look at the comb filtering, and I did, but I didn't include that in the presentation. But here's an example of something done right. I used fourth order, that is 24 dB per octave slopes. And what we know is to get proper summing, the crossover point needs to be 6 dB down. So let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How about that? Right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, if this response were flat, that would be 6 dB down. So this follows Linkwitz-Riley fourth order acoustic response. That's highly desirable for another reason. If this door woofer, what I noticed about the crossover point with the door woofer, if you're playing a cello or a double bass or something and it's in the left stage, what can happen is if your door woofer plays more than about 250 hertz, your attention will go downward to that door woofer. And when you hear the cello, it will sound low. And in the bus, my goal was to have a soundstage that's high and level and minimize the effect of what they call rainbowing, which is the drooping down of the soundstage to the sides, to the extremes. We had this great auditorium in San Diego. It's the Neuroscience Center. They changed the name of it. I'm sorry what it's called now. I don't know. We got to see the Hutchins Consort, which is a set of violins made by Carlene Hutchins. And Joe McNally plays the double bass violin, and just amazing to hear it live and then to translate that experience into the bus. very important to listen to live music and correlate what you're programming versus what you're measuring versus what you're hearing live. So this worked out quite well. There are many great designers, by the way, who subscribe to this fourth order approach. So one of the advantages of the fourth order approach is you lower distortion, you put less strain on the driver. You also draw less attention to the door woofer because you're cutting it off faster. The same with the subwoofer. So the subwoofer, actually I forgot to include the subwoofer, but it goes something like this right here. So it crosses over about 50 or 60 hertz and comes down here. Sorry about that. The other goal is, of course, not to call attention to the subwoofer. So again, you want to cut it off quickly, but you want it to integrate in a way with the door woofers that works well. Oh, and time alignment on this. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, here's a comparison of left and right. So ideally, these would be the same, but let's say neglecting the dips that I can't fix is pretty good. And you can see the effects below 200 hertz, especially in the lower region, the difference is less. And it's quite smooth. And in the treble, plus or minus a dB, maybe plus or minus 1.5 in the treble, except for this dip here at 2K. And maybe that dip isn't so bad because your ears are most sensitive. They have a resonance at that frequency, and maybe this would be considered the presence region. And so I saw this response and I thought, that could either add a smoothness or it could take away presence. So I wonder which it is. So then we did some critical listening and we decided that wasn't so bad. Time alignment is everything. It's absolutely everything. And I learned it the hard way. Here's a comparison of left and right. This is the time scale. Each division is a millisecond. The magnitude, this is just the voltage magnitude of the microphone. So left is blue, red is right. And what we have here is the tweeter firing, then overshooting, then the mid-range firing and overshooting, then the door woofer firing and overshooting, and then the subwoofer. So you can see the tweeter starts at about 24.3, and by the time maybe 1 millisecond has transpired, the mid-range has completely fired, and then several milliseconds later the door woofer fires. This is classic time alignment and classic integration using fourth order structure. Many great designers use this. Lawrence Dickey's Vivid loudspeakers do this. This is essentially key to good frequency integration and proper fill-in at the crossover points. Let's see another point. There are many who believe that time aligning the subwoofer is unnecessary. I believe that it's very necessary. And in fact, my experimentation, I didn't have time to include it because we're already 38 minutes into the presentation. But let me say this. I did the tweeter first, integrated the mid-range. I do intra-channel, which means all the left drivers, then all the right drivers. Then I delay the left drivers to get the center image. So this is both intra-driver integration and inter-driver integration by the fact that the tweeter spike occurs completely. Look, you can't even tell there's a red one there. It's underneath the blue one. That's perfect time arrival at the listening position. Now, what's all this nonsense here, these peaks? These are early reflections, so clearly the right side suffers from different reflections than the left side, and you can see that these become apparent. And some of these I haven't figured it out, but these should have a physical manifestation based on measured distances, but that would be quite complicated to figure out. But back to the subwoofer. There's clearly, in terms of timing, there's exactly a right time for the subwoofer to fire, and that right time is just like all the other drivers. When the door woofer has overshot and begins to rise, that's when the subwoofer needs to fire. If you try anything else, let's say you slide the subwoofer up and say, no, I think it's a good idea to put this rise with that rise because then they'll add together. Well, guess what? They don't. Because the subwoofer's still going up like this, way, way up, and then the door woofer's going down, and suddenly the door woofer is subtracting from the performance of the subwoofer. So you absolutely cannot slide the subwoofer forward. So time time alignment is so important, and it's so important to get, in fact, it is difficult to time align a subwoofer, and the first mistake I made when I did the time alignment is I turned on the right front woofer and turned on the subwoofer only. You know, and I go through each driver individually and then together to get to the final result. I time aligned the subwoofer to the right front woofer, and it was perfect integration, perfect fill-in. I'm like, wow, I've got it nailed. And I knew from measurements that it was perfect. And I said, okay, it's time to do the left. So I turned off the right, turned on the left, did them separately and together. Oh boy, what a train wreck. The left woofer is delayed 1.5 milliseconds from the right woofer. And the fill-in from the transition of the left woofer to the subwoofer was completely horrible. It was a complete no. It was as if there was no fill-in at all, as a consequence of only 1.5 milliseconds of error in the timing of the subwoofer. So now I had a dilemma. It's perfect on the right. Now what do I do with the left? So I've realized I faced an optimization problem. So I went through step by step at 1/2 millisecond intervals to get the optimum response for both positions. And what I was able to do is integrate the left woofer and the right woofer such that the dip was minimally noticeable, maybe a dB or 2. So remember, we wanted that 6 dB fill-in at the crossover point. I probably got a 4 dB fill-in. So not quite perfect, but after all, you saw the frequency response. It's not quite perfect. Never is. You can see the red's a little better. The left is a little crossover. Well, the crossover point's right in here somewhere, but obviously there is just this tiny bit of a transitional difficulty between the subwoofer and the, again, no apology, because this is a consequence of properly delaying the left stage to achieve a balanced sound stage in the center image, and the consequence of having a sub mono in the rear. Now, those of you who've seen the subwoofer, it's 400 pounds. So there's no way that subwoofer is going to be up front. And even if it were up front, it would still suffer from time alignment problems. What I need are 2 400-pound subwoofers up front on rubber isolated mounts, and oh, guess what? There's no room. So again, a dilemma, a compromise, a design decision. Vance Dickinson once said it best. He goes, if loudspeaker design were pure science, everybody could just take the components and use theories and put it together and achieve a result that requires no interpretation, no listening, no artistic component involved. Well, that's nonsense. Loudspeaker design is very much based on critical listening, because a microphone only tells part of the story. It's an essential tool, but not the only tool. So, that brings us to the next aspect. Well, let's go back to the frequency response. Okay, so I had this. So this was technically good and sounding really quite good as well. I mean, what wouldn't sound good with that flat response across the mid-range and treble, and that beautiful even uprise in the bass and sub-bass, well, the bass region, following the equal loudness contour. So then I employed my friend and mentor, Steve McCormack, to come in and listen to the system. And this is where his ears and his experience came in, and he listened to the system critically and made 1.5 dB, up to 1.5 dB adjustments here and there throughout the frequency response. And if those of you who know Steve McCormack, he's a wildly famous audio component designer, 30, 40 years of experience in the high-end. He was at the inception of the high-end audio industry, and he was trained as a recording engineer, and he frequently does mixing and mastering, and he's held in high regard by some of the best mixing and mastering engineers who know him and know his work. So I'm the lucky benefactor. And he tried to teach me one important thing. He likes to call me Johnny, and you guys can call me Johnny too if you'd like. He'd say, Johnny, trust your ears, which is a very important lesson. Don't go by the microphone. And my reply was, why should I trust my ears when I have your ears? Anyway, I don't think he found that too funny. And anyway, thanks to Steve, he provided the critical listening and the experience to take the system from a technically good level to a superb level that many of you have heard and enjoy. And I'm very, very thankful for Steve's mentorship and contribution to the project. Yes?
At 250, what is the huge or significant difference between your left and right channel?
Yeah, what is it? It's I can explain it really easily. It has a physical manifestation, and it's based on the early reflection, the path length difference. So imagine you're sitting in your car. Let's use these two monitors as an example. So you're sitting in your car. Well, you're off center, right? You're off center. So that speaker fires, goes from here to the glass to your ear, this ear, then it goes to this ear, but it also goes to the glass to that ear. So now you have all of this cross-talk and this cross-contamination, comb filtering. This speaker is interesting as well, because the sound goes from here to your ears. Of course, it has to wrap around your head, which is a whole nother issue. Your head, based on the dimensions of your head, comes into play at about 624 hertz. Below 624, your head doesn't exist. It's not big enough to, matter with the measurements. So then, this speaker has the interesting and different consequence of going from there to there. That's a much longer path length difference than that speaker. That speaker only had to go like a foot and a half to your ear. This time arrival goes clear across the car and then back across the car again. And that's what you're seeing there. The effects of being asymmetric in the car And it's a consequence of the side glass. You cannot eliminate it, and you should not eliminate it. It is inappropriate to correct for it, because you can't correct for it. And if you tried, you would mess up the frequency response, the direct frequency response. This slide means a lot to me. Richard Beers is the reason I'm here at this show. I was the first car to be at the show. He believed in me. When he shouldn't. I approached him and he said, "Are you nuts? This is a high-end home audio show. Nobody cares about cars." And I said, "When I get there, they will." And the first year I went, he was right. Nobody really cared about my car. A few people did. But I kept, and he thought, well, I'm at the Flamingo. This is Richard Beers with, this was, I wish I could see, this picture was taken, I think at my first show at The Show Las Vegas in 2012 with Richard. And this was Larry Mitchell, back behind the Flamingo. And I was back by the dumpster, at the Flamingo, a very prestigious location. But we had great fun, and we were making a difference. And we took audio files, home audio files out to hear the bus and to hear Larry. And many people said, "Thanks for giving me the few moments of relief from the show that I really wanted." So Richard saw this happen, and he had fun. And he said, "You should come back next year." And year after year, I came back. This is Richard in 2014 with Larry and Dean. Again, back up behind the Flamingo by the dumpster. But we had more people and more. And then I came to the first The Show Newport. And I've been at every The Show Newport thanks to Richard and his incredible support. And I'd like to thank everybody. It's time to, it's 11:04. And you're scheduled for 11:15, and thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, and thank you to Richard. I owe so much to Richard, and I'm so appreciative. And thank you to Sony Corporation and Hiro San, especially for making the GS9 and making this the best show that we've ever had. And we really miss Richard, but Maureen is doing a fabulous job, and I hope that we can carry on Richard's legacy and give him the respect and honor that he gave us. Thank you, everyone.